Hey guys, tonight we time travel to a place where dinner could last longer than most modern jobs and where wearing the wrong wig could destroy your social standing. Welcome to Versailles, the glittering, exhausting epicenter of French royal life under Louis XIV. You're here not just as a guest, but as an observer, a fly on the gilded wall of one of history's most ridiculously elaborate dinner parties. The kind where 200 people might attend, and only a handful get to eat anything hot. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I always love knowing where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the gravel path leading to the Palace of Versailles, your buckled shoes already caked in dust. It's early evening and the ember light pooling over the manicured gardens looks like it was painted there. You're technically on time for dinner, but here's your first lesson at Versailles. Time bends around the Sun King Louis XIV. Inside the palace, chandeliers glitter with hundreds of candles lit one by nervous valets, and the air is thick with perfume and powdered wigs. You're herded through a gallery of mirrors, your reflection fracturing in every direction, until you reach the salle du grand couvert, the main dining room. You're starving, of course. Rookie mistake. The guests are already assembled, lounging in a variety of silks and brocades, whispering behind feathered fans. But no one is eating. Why? Because Louis isn't here yet. And until he sits, no fork shall be lifted, no soup slurped. Historians still argue whether the endless waiting was a display of control or simply a product of courtly dysfunction. Either way, it worked. Everyone's too afraid to snack. The table is a monument in itself, stretching nearly wall to wall, draped in gold-threaded linen, set with dishes you're not supposed to touch. You see golden plates as large as wagon wheels, and goblets so elaborate they might double as defensive weapons. And yet, no food. See, Louis's dinners were more performance than nourishment. The actual eating was secondary to the spectacle. It was about being seen, which is unfortunate because your stomach is currently staging a revolution. Finally, a ripple of motion rolls through the room. Doors swing open. A trumpet sounds. Louis XIV enters. He moves slowly, deliberately, dressed in a sapphire velvet coat with gold embroidery and enough lace at his cuffs to wrap a toddler in. His heels click like punctuation marks. He nods just once and the room exhales. This is the grand couvert, the public dinner. You and dozens of others are here not as participants, but spectators. You're watching the royal family eat. Yes, watching them eat. It's like medieval dinner theater, only you don't get a meal or a program. If you're lucky, someone might pass you a biscuit out of pity, maybe. At the head of the table, Louis sits. His fork is raised. A hush falls, dramatic and absolute. The first course is served. Served! To him, food arrives on silver platters, each one presented with the pomp of a coronation. A page boy carries in roast capon with oranges. Behind him, a footman brings truffled eggs nested in pastry. A third offers up oysters arranged in a symmetrical star, just in case geometry was on the menu. As you watch, your hunger becomes almost existential. You begin to think about how food represents power, who gets to eat, what gets served, how it's presented. These are all choices. Choices made to remind everyone of the king's divine right to not just rule but dine. Quirky side note, Louis was famously picky about cleanliness. He even had a royal tooth scraper. No joke. It was an official court position. So while you're starving, someone else's job is to clean the royal molars. The meal continues at an agonizingly slow pace. There's no music, no chatter beyond the faint rustle of silks and the sound of silver touching porcelain. Every eye is on Louis. Every gesture he makes becomes law for the evening. He dabs his mouth with a napkin. 50 other hands follow. He sips wine, goblets tilt all around. And here's where it gets almost surreal. You realize Most of these dishes are never meant to be eaten at all. They're showpieces constructed like edible architecture. By the time that they make it from the kitchen 3 floors down to the table, they're lukewarm at best. Some are already cold, some are decorative, and some are so absurdly overcooked they might classify as ceramics. Still, this is how you win favor. Cooks and chefs compete for attention, knowing that one well-plated quail could lead to a patronage or ruin. As the light dims outside, candelabras are brought in. The gold on the table starts to shimmer with a gentle, hazy warmth. You can't help but be mesmerized. It's beautiful. Maddening, but beautiful. And then just when your hunger reaches the point of delirium, you smell something miraculous. Bread. Someone near you breaks off a piece from a hidden pouch in their coat, and mouths don't tell. You accept a crumb like it's contraband, because here at this impossibly long and hollow feast, sometimes survival means finding sustenance where you can, even if it's just in the smell of roasted almonds or a smuggled heel of rye. The second course begins long after your sense of time has crumbled into the velvet folds of an embroidered chair. You're not sure if it's been an hour or 3. The windows have darkened, and the candles have burned an inch shorter. And yet the grand parade of dishes shows no sign of slowing. If you were to catalog the items arriving at the king's table, it would read like a menu composed by a fantasy novelist with a flair for protein. Wild boar glazed with honey and mustard seeds. Swan, yes, swan, roasted with its own feathers stitched back in for presentation. Pigeons stuffed with chestnut puree. One entire peacock feathers intact tail fanned in what can only be described as edible intimidation. Most of these dishes, of course, are lukewarm curiosities by the time they reach the table. But that's hardly the point. This is Versailles, after all. And here's a fun twist. Very few people, including the king, actually eat that much. Louis XIV was famously a moderate eater. Despite the mountain of food placed before him, he usually stuck to a few bites of his favorite dishes, roasted meat soups, and occasionally a slice of melon. Meanwhile, everyone else at court learned to mimic his habits. If Louis sipped soup, courtiers sipped soup. If Louis ignored the roasted hare, no one dared touch theirs either. Historians still argue whether this ritualistic restraint was about discipline or a form of culinary theater. But one thing is clear, it created a court where appetite was political. Meanwhile, down in the palace kitchens, it's a very different world. You descend, if only in imagination, 3 levels below the glittering halls. It's hot, loud, chaos bottled inside stone walls. Dozens of cooks in sweat-streaked linen scramble between open hearths and prep tables. Knives clatter, chickens roast, someone yells for more eels. Somewhere else, someone's crying over a collapsed soufflé. This is where the real action is. The royal kitchen staff numbered in the hundreds, with layers of rank nearly as rigid as the nobility upstairs. At the top, the premier écuyer de cuisine, or first squire of the kitchen. Below him, brigades of sous chefs, meat preparers, sauce makers, pastry artisans, and about a dozen poor souls whose entire job it was to prepare sugar sculptures, delicate edible statues of animals, chariots, even entire battle scenes. One quirky tidbit there was once an attempt to craft a life-size sugar bust of the king. It melted mid-meal. You probably could have heard the panic in Italy. Now zoom out for a second and take in the logistics. For just one of these dinners, the ingredients might include 200 chickens, 50 pounds of veal, 100 lobsters, 40 pheasants, 300 eggs, and a small army's worth of wine herbs and butter. All of this had to be delivered, sorted, cleaned, prepped, and plated without refrigeration, mind you. The only thing colder than the food was the attitude of the head steward if something went wrong. Back in the dining hall, the king is now moving into what could loosely be described as the sweet phase. Think fruits, jellies, candied nuts, little marzipan figurines, some shaped like animals, others like, well, depending on the sculptor's mood, questionable metaphors. You spot one shaped like a lute and wonder if it's meant to serenade or insult someone at the table. You also notice something else, the quiet competition. Around the table, nobles aren't just dining, they're performing. Napkin folds, polite laughs, graceful bites, every movement is calculated. That man 2 seats down, he's been slowly sliding his chair closer to a duke all night. The lady in lavender. She's holding her spoon with exaggerated delicacy, likely trying to impress someone's aunt, with a pension to bestow. Because in this world, dinner isn't downtime. It's a resume, a reputation, a gamble. Louis, of course, knows all of this. He built the system. Every detail of life at Versailles was crafted by Louis XIV to centralize power, and dinner was no exception. Want a promotion? Better show up to the grand couvert. Want to win favor? Better applaud the roast venison like it's the second coming. Even your seat at the table, assuming you're ever granted one, is a statement. Closer to the king, you're important. Closer to the wall, you're replaceable. It's a social ladder served on a silver dish. And yet, despite the pressures, there's something undeniably mesmerizing about it all. The flickering candlelight playing across the gilded cornices, the low, respectful hum of whispers, the smell, earthy and sweet like roasted pears and old parchment. You start to feel oddly at peace. Because while the court may be a shark tank in powdered wigs, it's also beautifully choreographed. You're watching a dance with no music, a play with no script, and somehow everyone knows their part. The king wipes his fingers on a monogrammed linen napkin. The servers bow. A page steps forward to present a gold bowl filled with rosewater. Louis dips his fingers, then rises. It's over. He exits just as he entered, slowly with intent. The entire room stands. And then chaos. Conversations explode. Cutlery clinks. People lean in to share gossip they'd been storing like squirrels with secrets. A violinist strikes up something soft and slow. The performance has ended, and now, for a brief moment, the palace becomes human again. You, meanwhile, are trying to figure out whether there's still food left in the hallway. There is. Cold pheasant never tasted so good. Your stomach may be full, or at least fooled, but the evening is far from done. As the plates are cleared, and the candle wax puddles in quiet resignation, you find yourself swept along with the slow migration of powdered shoulders and embroidered hems toward the next phase of the night, courtly entertainment. And let's be clear, this is not your Netflix and tea kind of wind-down. This is Louis XIV's Versailles, which means you're about to be offered an amuse-bouche of culture, pageantry, and just the slightest whiff of barely suppressed social warfare. You trail behind a particularly fragrant marquise as the crowd moves into the Salon de Vénus, one of many ornate rooms in the palace named after classical deities. Gold leaf moldings glint overhead. Every inch of wall space is filled with oil portraits of dead ancestors, mythological heroes, or both, sometimes combined. Imagine Hercules, but with the face of someone's great uncle. The musicians are already tuning. A soft flutter of strings, the distant tap of a harpsichord key. This is the part of the evening where you sit, smile politely, and pretend to understand 17th century opera. Tonight's offering is a light piece by Lully, the court composer, who basically lived at Versailles, and for good reason. He knew how to flatter his king through music. Most of his works include some veiled praise of Louis as a sun god figure, which, to be fair, is exactly the sort of branding Louis XIV loved. Fun fact, Lully once conducted an orchestra using a long wooden staff. During one performance, he accidentally stabbed himself in the foot with it. The wound got infected, he refused to amputate, and he died. From conducting, historians still argue whether it was arrogance or artistic devotion, or maybe just bad footwear. Anyway, the music starts. You close your eyes. You're not entirely sure what's happening. In the opera, someone loves someone else, but they've been turned into a tree, or possibly a goat. But it doesn't matter. The melodies are gentle, the harpsichord pleasantly hypnotic, and the audience perfectly still, as if holding their collective breath for beauty. Across the room, a young noble blinks slowly, then catches himself before nodding off. Not because he's bored, mind you, but because he's been awake for 18 hours rehearsing how to bow without creasing his coat. It's exhausting looking that elegant. You catch another detail, a small commotion near the corner, where one duchess's tiny dog has escaped its satin leash and is now making a slow, triumphant circuit around the polished floor. People pretend not to notice, but secretly they're thrilled. Entertainment is entertainment, whether it's divine arias or runaway lapdogs. But now the opera ends, and the real social games begin. As the musicians bow and back away like servants of a magical realm, the court rearranges itself into conversational clusters. You drift through one circle, then another, like a courtly bee pollinating egos. In one corner, two countesses are debating fashion. Italian lace is so last season, one whispers, although it's a mystery how seasons work when everything is imported. In another corner, a gentleman is animatedly describing the king's latest hunting triumph. Spoiler, the deer did not make it. There's laughter, feigned interest, and the occasional raised eyebrow meant to signal either shock or mild indigestion. And you're playing the part of the alert observer. You nod, you chuckle, you hold a crystal glass of something you can't quite identify, possibly spiced cherry wine, or maybe melted perfume, and you let the opulence wash over you. Here's your quirky tidbit for this chapter. Some nobles actually practiced their facial expressions before attending court. There were literal manuals on how to smile just enough, how to nod like a person of taste, how to listen without really listening. Versailles was less a palace and more a perpetual audition for favor. And Louis, he's still here, watching everything. Sometimes he'll reappear during these entertainments dressed more casually, if you can call embroidered silk casual. He might exchange a few words with a visiting ambassador, or let his hand rest meaningfully on the shoulder of a young duke, instantly turning him into the most envied man in the room. The king's presence acts like a gravitational force. Wherever he goes, people orbit. You can feel the pressure, not from Louis directly, he's too refined for that, but from everyone else, measuring every gesture, every phrase, every reaction. There's a reason they called him the Sun King. Like the sun, he radiated life and burned anyone who got too close. Still, not everything is so tense. There are moments, brief but real, where laughter bubbles up sincerely, where a joke lands or someone spills a drink and chuckles instead of panicking, where two friends, actual friends, not strategic alliances, share a memory of a time before their lives were ruled by etiquette and powdered wigs. You cling to those moments. They're rare, but they shimmer like moonlight on the polished floor. And then just as you're about to mentally sneak away to your feather-stuffed bedchamber, someone claps their hands. More music. This time, it's for dancing. The minuet begins and couples pair off with the stiff grace of people who've been practicing since childhood. You watch as skirts swirl and heels tap in perfect rhythm. The dance floor becomes a delicate clockwork of motion. Step, turn, bow, smile, pivot, glide. It's mesmerizing. Also completely exhausting. Historians still argue whether these dances were meant for joy or for intimidation. A chance to impress with your poise, balance, and control, or to subtly shame the clumsy into social oblivion, probably both. Eventually, though, the music slows. People begin to drift toward velvet benches and marble archways. The night has stretched as far as it can without folding into itself. You've made it through the opera, the conversations, the dance, and still there are hours left before dawn. Versailles doesn't sleep. It dozes in diamonds. You would think after a symphony, a dance and 3,000 courses that everyone would collapse in a heap of brocade and powdered wigs. But you'd be wrong. It's Versailles after all, and here the concept of enough does not apply. The palace doesn't yawn. It purrs, quietly, endlessly, like a cat draped in gold. And so, as midnight edges closer, the atmosphere doesn't slow down. It deepens like a rich sauce thickening over low heat. You now find yourself in what might best be described as the corridor hour. No one's officially doing anything anymore, but everything is still happening. People drift like scented clouds through mirrored halls, whispering over shoulder fans, adjusting garters, plotting marriages, or remembering they left a cousin asleep in the billiards room 3 hours ago. You pass by a narrow table laid out with sugared violets and candied orange peels, the remnants of what was probably a full dessert buffet an hour earlier. A bored-looking page boy pokes at a dish of spun sugar shaped like a phoenix. You're not sure if you're allowed to eat it or if it's symbolic. Maybe both. And there finally is your salvation, a tall servant in gold-trimmed livery, carrying a silver tray of something blessedly herbal. Tea, or at least a 17th century idea of tea. You accept a tiny cup and let it warm your fingers. It smells faintly of rose petals and crushed mint. You sip. It tastes like perfumed water served in a dream, barely real, slightly sweet, and just enough to keep your eyes from drooping. Across from you, 2 elderly dukes are having an intense discussion about wigs. One believes that shorter wigs make a man look youthful and alert. The other insists that volume equals virtue. They point to various courtiers as examples, citing their rise or fall at court as direct consequences of hair height. Historians still argue whether Versailles fashion shaped politics or merely mirrored it, but here the argument feels very real and ridiculous and kind of charming. You chuckle quietly and keep walking. Somewhere in the distance you hear laughter, a younger crowd gathered near the games room. Gambling is, of course, strictly regulated, which in Versailles speak means everyone's doing it, but only if Louis doesn't mind. You peek in and see a low-lit chamber with velvet chairs and polished card tables. Nobles are hunched over decks of hand-painted cards, eyes glinting with desperation and delight. There's a quiet clink of coins and the occasional sharp intake of breath when a round is lost dramatically. Someone throws down a queen of spades and collapses theatrically. Applause follows. Apparently that was part of the game. But you don't linger. You pass through a gallery lined with busts of Roman emperors because nothing says relaxing evening like being silently judged by marble Caesars. The torches flicker gently, casting dancing shadows that make Augustus look like he's rolling his eyes at the decadence. And now, at last, a gentle hush begins to fall. Not silence, but softness. You follow it like a trail drawn toward the Salon de Diane, a room of silvers and dusky blues, where people gather to be quietly seen and minimally interesting. Here, conversation slows to a murmur. It's the social equivalent of pajama time. A lady yawns elegantly. A chevalier removes his gloves with theatrical care. A dog snores under a chaise longue, its tiny jeweled collar catching the firelight. And you, tired but happy, sink into a high-backed chair with embroidered armrests and sigh without shame. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night. There were actual rules for sighing at court. A sigh could imply boredom, dissatisfaction, flirtation, or spiritual reflection, so people often practiced them in private to avoid sending the wrong message. Your sigh, you hope, lands somewhere between content, fatigue, and pleasantly dazed. Now comes one of the most surreal moments of the night, a brief reappearance of Louis himself. Not in full regalia, but in a richly brocaded robe, his famous red-heeled shoes still immaculate. He appears in the doorway, says something mild about the stars being particularly bright tonight, and offers a tired smile. That's it. No decree, no grand gesture, just a reminder that the sun still shines even at 1:45 a.m. People murmur approval, bow slightly, and return to their cushions. The moment feels like a dream, a page from a storybook fluttering in the candle breeze. Your limbs feel impossibly heavy now. The candles sputter slightly lower, the conversations grow fainter. Even the ever-bustling servants move more slowly, as if Versailles itself is starting to exhale. You glance up at the ceiling where painted gods recline on clouds and cherubs toss roses into the sky. One cherub seems to be winking at you, or maybe that's just your eyes playing tricks. There's a warm weight in your chest, not just from the food or the tea, but from something else. That strange, floaty feeling of having witnessed something excessive, ridiculous, and beautiful all at once, like being inside a snow globe of history, glittering and contained. And still, you're not in bed. But soon, you close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to rest. And when you open them again, the room has changed. Half the chairs are empty. The fire has burned lower. A footman tiptoes past with a sleepy puppy in his arms. Someone sings a lullaby in Occitan near the corridor, their voice low and untrained, but heartbreakingly sweet. Time feels different here, elastic, soft-edged. And you're still here, at the world's most indulgent, exhausting, and oddly comforting dinner party. But now it's almost over. The party hasn't ended yet, but Versailles has entered that most delicate of phases, the ghost hour. You're not alone, but it feels like you are. The palace, once bursting with color and sound, has dulled to a hush, as if the gilded walls themselves are sighing from the strain of too much spectacle. Only a few dozen guests remain scattered across the rooms, their conversations lazy and half-finished like dreams drifting into forgetfulness. You find yourself drawn toward the private salons, smaller chambers tucked behind the grand halls. Here intimacy rules. Low chairs, heavy drapes, a fireplace that crackles more for ambiance than warmth. A few courtiers have curled up near the hearth, still in full dress, but visibly slouched as though surrendering inch by inch to the idea of bedtime. A marquise fans herself with a playing card. A young baron, clearly tipsy, tries to recount a classical myth and fumbles the gods' names. No, it was definitely Neptune who gave us wine, or was it Plato? No one corrects him. It doesn't matter. Logic is suspended. You sit on a velvet settee that swallows you whole. The embroidery is a riot of oranges and golds, flames, possibly, or maybe vines. You're too tired to decide. And then a soft rustling from a nearby alcove. You peek through a crack in the curtain and witness something utterly mundane yet bizarrely intimate, a noblewoman removing her shoes, very slowly, very carefully, as if they might explode, one heel at a time, followed by a delicate wig adjustment and a muttered "enfin." You blink and she's gone, vanished into one of Versailles' countless passageways. You begin to understand how people could get lost here, not just physically, but mentally. The corridors wind like thoughts. Rooms appear where they shouldn't, and behind every mirror it feels like another version of you is still wandering the party. Here's a historical tidbit. Louis XIV employed an army of hidden valets who moved behind the walls to deliver messages, adjust lighting, and observe court behavior unseen. Think of them as the world's most luxurious secret service. Historians still argue whether their true purpose was logistics or surveillance. Probably both. It's now well past 2 a.m. Someone passes you a small plate of candied chestnuts. You chew absent-mindedly their sugary crunch, loud in the quiet. Your mouth is too tired to taste. Across the room, a pair of noblemen are locked in a game of chess that appears to have begun in another century. And then, just when you think nothing stranger could happen, comes the philosopher. You don't know his name, and he isn't formally introduced. He simply appears in the doorway holding a thick, leather-bound book and an expression of deep concern. He looks around, finds an audience, you and the chess players, and begins talking. About time, about how a moment at Versailles stretches like taffy, how a conversation can last longer than a treaty, how the king's heartbeat supposedly synchronizes with the ticking of the palace clocks. No one stops him. It's that kind of hour. He speaks of dîner éternel, the eternal dinner where food never ends and guests never leave. A metaphor, maybe, or a warning, or just something he made up after a long night of plum brandy and metaphysics. You don't remember falling asleep, but suddenly you're jolted awake, not rudely, just lightly, like a feather brushing your cheek. A footman bowing apologetically invites you to retire to a guest chamber. Retire, as if you were a duchess in a play. You nod solemnly and rise with great ceremony, your limbs cracking like old floorboards. The palace sways slightly as you walk, either from tiredness or just the natural rhythm of Versailles after 3 a.m. You follow the servant through a side door, past a gallery of fading tapestries that look like they've absorbed every yawn and whispered scandal of the last century. One shows a unicorn eating a pear. You're too sleepy to question it. And then, miracle of miracles, a bedroom, soft candlelight, a 4-poster bed with curtains thicker than your winter coat, a basin of rose water for washing, a nightshirt laid out by invisible hands. You change slowly as if undressing is a puzzle, then slide into bed with a groan so deep it echoes back from the past. And the sheets, cool linen, smelling faintly of lavender starch and eternity. As you sink into the mattress, you become aware of a sound so faint, so constant, you nearly missed it. Ticking, not just from a single clock, but dozens. Versailles is full of clocks, each chiming slightly out of sync. It's like the palace is breathing through brass lungs. Some tick gently, others click like beetles in a jar. And one somewhere near your bed gives a high-pitched ting every 47 seconds. It's almost comforting, almost. And now, in this half-waking state, your mind begins to drift. You think about the idea of time as a feast, how Louis tried to turn his own lifespan into a grand, continuous banquet. Every hour portioned out like a course, waking, dressing, parading, eating, nodding again, and eventually slipping away into sleep. You wonder, when did he dream? And what of the guests who stayed too long? The courtiers who never went home, who forgot the outside world even existed? You're not sure if you're asleep yet. You might still be in that velvet chair, or walking through a corridor of clouds and powdered wigs, or sipping invisible tea under the painted eyes of Roman gods. But for now you're here, in a borrowed bed inside a palace made of ambition and candlelight. And the dinner party, it's still going. Somewhere someone is raising a glass. A fork is scraping a plate. A violin is being tuned for the 100th time tonight. But you're finally blissfully slipping away. You wake groggy to sunlight pouring in through lace-draped windows like honey through a sieve. Morning at Versailles doesn't so much begin as unfold slowly, with creaking joints and powdered yawns. Outside your window, a manicured garden glistens under the dew, and somewhere a fountain begins its daily performance with the enthusiasm of a nobleman's second-born. Your head aches just a bit, probably the wine, or the candied chestnuts, or that philosophical monologue about time dilation. Hard to say. You shuffle out of bed and splash your face with rose water that's gone slightly tepid. Someone has placed fresh slippers by your feet, as if they knew your exact shoe size. You're no longer surprised by the strange, magical efficiency of Versailles. If the palace wants you dressed and moving, it will make it happen. Downstairs breakfast is not what you'd call modest. The long table is once again groaning, not literally, although that might be next, with trays of brioche, marzipan fruits, goat cheese wrapped in vine leaves, and something that looks suspiciously like a roasted songbird under a silver dome. You blink. The dome is closed again. You decide to stick with bread. Guests are gathering again, some dressed as if they never went to bed, others in refreshed but identical attire. Powdered wigs are back in full force, but now they're morning wigs, slightly smaller, with less architectural ambition. You overhear a footman whisper that the king himself is already preparing for mass. And that means one thing: the spectacle is about to reset. Because life at Versailles follows an ironclad routine, especially for Louis XIV. He liked his days predictable, as tightly orchestrated as an opera's overture. First, the lever, or rising, a deeply choreographed ritual where dozens of courtiers jostled for the honor of witnessing the king wake up, stretch, and possibly sneeze. Historians still argue whether this ritual was born of genuine regal dignity or sheer political genius. Maybe both. After all, nothing cements power quite like forcing other grown adults to celebrate your morning breath. You don't get to see the lever. You're not that important, but you do catch a glimpse of the procession heading to the chapel. Robes of state gliding like ships across parquet floors. Music spilling ahead like incense. Louis XIV is carried along in this wave, untouchable, divine, and deeply punctual. You follow at a distance because why not? Everyone else is. The chapel of Versailles is nothing short of breathtaking. High ceilings, vaulted arches, more marble than sense. A massive pipe organ begins to sing as you slip into a back pew. It feels like sitting inside a Fabergé egg. The Mass begins. You try to follow, but the Latin murmurs and incense haze make it feel like a dream you can't quite wake from. Your stomach grumbles. Someone shushes you. You don't care. And just when it all seems unbearably holy, and still someone sneezes loudly. The whole room reacts with theatrical horror. Heads swivel, eyes narrow. This is no ordinary sneeze. This is a potential political misstep. You watch the poor offender, a young marquis, blush the color of mulled wine. He may not recover from this for years. But that's the Versailles way. Small moments, enormous consequences. After the service, the guests disperse into a less formal kind of chaos. Some wander the gardens, others return to their salons. A handful sneak in naps behind tapestries. You drift too, following no plan, just footsteps on polished wood. You find yourself in the Hall of Mirrors, and it is somehow both more and less impressive than the paintings. Mirrors line the walls in gleaming, slightly warped rows, each reflecting endless versions of the same tired, overdressed humans. Sunlight bounces off gilded moldings. It's enough to make your eyes weep. Here's your historical fact. For the day, the Hall of Mirrors wasn't just for pomp, it was a subtle flex. At the time, mirrors were staggeringly expensive, and France's ability to produce them domestically rather than import from Venice was a major point of national pride. The room screams, "We are wealthy and self-sufficient," in 357 glass panels. You press a hand to one mirror. It's cool, solid, real, but you still half expect your reflection to smirk back independently. Versailles will do that to you. And then something unexpected. A jester, not in full Jingle Bell costume, but clearly there for entertainment. He balances a crystal goblet on his head, recites odes in perfect Greek, and juggles dried figs. The audience, 4 elderly duchesses sipping tea and pretending not to be amused. He catches your eye and gives a wink. You smile despite yourself. It's not just the scale of Versailles that bewilders, it's the randomness, the little flashes of absurdity inside, the overwhelming grandeur, like a goose waddling through a symphony. You wander back toward the smaller salons and find a new activity. Underway, morning gambling. Cards, dice, even a makeshift wheel of fortune set up near a harpist who plays moody chords as people lose their inheritances in real time. A countess laughs too loudly. A duke smashes a porcelain plate in pretend frustration. Gold coins clink. A valet discreetly sweeps up a dropped diamond ring with the same energy one might use to collect breadcrumbs. You don't gamble, you've barely figured out how to sit properly in these chairs. But you watch. The tension is theatrical, the stakes mostly symbolic, but the emotions all too real. At some point, someone offers you a cup of thick, spiced chocolate. You sip it carefully. It tastes like candle wax and crushed dreams, but in a strangely comforting way. By now it's nearly midday, and you realize something: there's no end to this. The party doesn't stop. The guests don't leave. Even the servants move, as if caught in a loop. You think about Louis XIV, about How he designed all this to keep his court near dependent and busy, always busy. So busy they wouldn't think to scheme or leave or live. You're caught in his web, willingly and oddly happily, because despite the aching feet and sensory overload, there's something deeply soothing about a world where every hour has a purpose, every meal has a name, and every yawn is just a prelude to applause. The air thickens with expectation around midday, and you sense the palace leaning toward yet another high point, the grand déjeuner or royal lunch. But don't be fooled, this isn't a repeat of last night's pageantry. This is a different beast, more ceremonial, more theatrical, and somehow even more exhausting. You are not personally invited to dine with the king. Very few are, but that doesn't mean you can't observe. At Versailles, even eating is a spectator sport. You trail the flow of silken gowns and embroidered coats toward the royal apartments. The hall of mirrors now echoes with the polite clatter of heeled shoes and low laughter. Someone fans themselves like they're being paid by the flap. In the designated room modestly called the Grand Chamber, the king will dine on public, meaning that upwards of 100 guests will stand and watch him eat. No talking, no eating alongside him, just admiration. Like a very awkward art exhibit if the painting occasionally reached for salt. Historians still debate whether Louis XIV truly enjoyed this public ritual or merely tolerated it as part of his political chess game. Either way, he showed up daily and performed the role of monarch who eats with divine confidence. You tuck yourself into a corner beside a particularly fragrant bouquet and a marble bust of someone long forgotten. There's a hush as Louis enters. He is flanked by footmen, his every step a cue in an invisible script. He sits. The table is already laden, a portrait of indulgence, quail stuffed with dates, gilded pears, freshwater fish in almond sauce, and soup served in delicate porcelain bowls. Each dish arrives with a bow. Each bite is deliberate. There's no rush. Time at Versailles bends politely around the king's hunger. Meanwhile, you hungry, underdressed, and uninvited salivate with quiet dignity. Then comes the twist. This isn't really about food. It's about power. Watching Louis XIV eat is watching France eat. Every morsel he chooses not to consume becomes in a way an offering to the gods of etiquette and control. You note that he chews slowly, with exactly 3 blinks between bites. The courtiers study him like monks, parsing a sacred text. Did he reach for the white wine first? Does that mean something? Should they all switch? There's a story, maybe apocryphal, maybe not, that Louis once changed the entire menu because he felt like peas, just peas. That evening, 64 dishes of various pea-based creations were served to the court. Pea ice cream, pea jelly, peas inside pastries shaped like pigeons, because why not? Here's the thing, if you're at Versailles, your whims are laws, as long as you're the Sun King. Eventually, the meal concludes with a delicate wipe of his lips and the regal nod that signals I am now full. Resume your lives. And they do, instantly, as if they were holding their breath the whole time. You exit the chamber with the crowd and find yourself herded gently, almost invisibly, toward the gardens. It's a warm afternoon, and the formal gardens of Versailles are in full theatrical bloom. Think geometric hedges, fountains that seem choreographed, and gravel paths so tidy they might have been vacuumed. You step into a fairy tale. The air smells like roses and ambition. This is not nature, not really. This is humanity's victory over nature, trimmed and symmetrical and paid for in endless hours of labor by unseen hands. Louis believed that controlling the landscape was as important as controlling his nobles. Order over chaos, you mutter as you pass a marble nymph vomiting water into a fish-shaped basin. You hear music. A small chamber ensemble has set up beneath a row of linden trees. Their instruments are polished to a mirror shine. The cellist has a particularly dramatic mustache, and the flutist appears to be flirting with 3 duchesses at once. People begin to drift toward the sound. settling onto wrought iron benches and embroidered cushions laid discreetly by servants. You join them, grateful for the shade. The music isn't sleepy, but it hums with elegance. Baroque melodies curl around you like ribbons. A woman offers you a candied violet. You accept because at this point saying no feels like breaking a law. A footman strolls by offering iced sherbet in tiny glass cups. You take one and for a moment everything is absurdly perfect. And then someone brings out the falcon. Yes, a falcon. Apparently one of the dukes enjoys impromptu falconry demonstrations. He gestures dramatically to the sky, and a handler wearing a leather glove the size of a dinner plate unleashes a bird that slices through the air like an opinion no one asked for. The falcon soars, spins, and lands gracefully on a raised perch. Everyone claps, including the flutist who nearly drops his instrument in the process. You are officially in a live-action fever dream. Historians still argue whether these outdoor entertainments were sincere diversions or carefully staged performances to remind courtiers of their place in the pecking order. You're leaning toward both. Someone mentions a game of jeu de paume, a kind of pre-tennis played with bare hands and heavy balls. You decline. Your hands are already tired from clapping. Instead, you wander deeper into the gardens where the crowds thin and the birds outnumber the dukes. A shaded path leads you to a small canal where gondolas float lazily. Yes, gondolas. Louis had a thing for Venice, and he made sure his garden had a canal just wide enough to pretend. You sit by the water watching nobles try not to fall in. Somewhere someone plays a lute. A child chases a butterfly. A swan nibbles at the hem of a baroness's skirt. She barely notices. And as you breathe in this orchestrated serenity, you begin to understand something essential about Versailles. It's not just a palace, it's a mood, a lifestyle, a perfectly manicured illusion. But somehow you don't want to leave it. Not yet. You blink and the sun has tilted slightly in the sky, casting golden diagonals across the garden paths. The scent of lilac and lemon balm lingers in the air like a half-remembered song. Afternoon at Versailles stretches on unhurried, decadent, and completely devoid of practical time. You find yourself ushered gently back inside. The hall of mirrors glints like 1,000 pocket suns, and the polished floors squeak under velvet slippers. You hear murmurs, preparations are underway. Not for dinner yet. Oh no, we're still a good few hours from that mountain. This is something else. The king's wardrobe awaits. You're about to witness one of the most elaborate, absurd, and weirdly structured rituals of Louis XIV's day, le grand habillage, the ceremonial dressing of the monarch. Yes, it happens twice a day, and yes, there are rules. You're not alone. A dozen courtiers are already gathering like theater patrons before a play. Only here the star wears stockings. A valet nods to you as you squeeze into a spot behind a tapestry depicting some Roman gods doing very Roman things. The room smells faintly of lavender water and powdered wigs. A hush falls. The king enters. This time he's in a silk dressing gown the color of boiled plums. His hair has been restyled, long powdered, and shaped with perfect curls, each one so precise you suspect it has a union. Several footmen hover nearby holding garments as if they were holy relics. Historians still debate how much of this routine was Louis's personal preference and how much was state theater. But one thing's for sure, it was meticulous, like a royal IKEA assembly manual if IKEA cost more than your annual salary. You watch transfixed as the dressing begins. First, stockings rolled slowly one leg at a time by a privileged courtier who bows deeply after. Then silk breeches, a brocade waistcoat, cuffs edged with Belgian lace, a stiff high collar that looks like it could double as a bird perch. Each item passed through 2 or 3 hands before reaching the king. He lifts his arms slightly. A coat deep teal with embroidered fleur-de-lis is draped over his shoulders. Gold buttons glint like tiny suns. You wonder if they're real. They are, of course they are. The shoes, heeled red and utterly unwalkable, go on last. He stands regal as ever, like a tapestry come to life. And then he nods. That's it. Dressing complete. The courtiers beam as if they dressed the sun itself. You try not to laugh because the man next to you looks like he might report you to the nearest chandelier. Now comes the royal promenade and indoor stroll through select salons and halls, just to remind everyone that Louis exists and he is glorious. You follow the procession through rooms painted with clouds and gold filigree. The walls themselves seem to bow as he walks by. In one corner, a lady in waiting faints, maybe from tight stays, maybe from awe. During this walk, nobles jockey for the rarest commodity at court, the king's gaze. Just a glance, a smirk, a single syllable. It could make or break your week. There's a story, possibly exaggerated, that one nobleman practiced tripping in front of the king just to be noticed. When he did it, Louis stepped around him without comment and moved on, crushed, socially vaporized. You stroll past a salon where courtiers debate poetry while sipping bittersweet orange water. One recites verses in a nasal monotone. Another is clearly asleep with their eyes open. In another room, the king pauses to watch a pair of dwarves perform a comedic skit about misplacing a powdered wig. Laughter erupts on cue. Louis smiles faintly, mission accomplished. You're ushered onward past chandeliers the size of garden sheds, and portraits so large they might have their own weather systems. One depicts Louis mid-conquest, arm extended, dramatically pointing toward something, possibly destiny, possibly a buffet table. Eventually, you arrive in one of the smaller drawing rooms. A servant offers you a petit four, the size of a thimble. It tastes like almond and ambition. Here's where things get weirdly casual. A group of courtiers engage in a game of questions. Indiscreet's a sort of early truth or dare, except the dare part is replaced by scandalous questions, whispered behind fans. You overhear snippets. Would you rather marry a Huguenot or go without powder for a month? Is it true the Comtesse de Montreuil has a third nipple? I heard the Dauphin reads Italian romances under his pillow. You slink away before you get drafted into the next round. Down another corridor, you catch sight of a marble hallway reserved for diplomatic guests. Each statue lining the walls represents a virtue, or at least an attempt at one. Justice is missing a nose and temperance looks smug. You pause at a large window overlooking the courtyard. The sun is lower now, and long shadows stretch like spilled ink across the cobblestones. The carriages have returned. More guests arrive. That's right, we're barely halfway through the day, and Versailles is about to fill up again, because tonight is dinner. And not just any dinner, a state dinner, with hundreds of dishes, 7 courses, musicians' candlelight, and more powdered wigs than a Shakespeare festival in a snowstorm. You sigh deeply. Your feet hurt just thinking about it. But you're not done yet, are you? Because Louis isn't done. He's only just getting warmed up. You don't hear the drums, but you feel them low, distant, like the heartbeat of Versailles itself, preparing for its moment of glory. The sky is blushing into twilight now, hues of peach and plum melting together like overripe fruit. The palace windows catch the fading light shimmering as though they have been painted in liquid gold. Inside, something magical is happening. You're standing in a corridor that leads to the grand dining salon, and you can smell it roasted meats. Sugared almonds, buttery sauces so rich you suspect they require their own tax code. The dinner hour draws near. Now let's get one thing clear, dinner at Louis XIV's Versailles wasn't just a meal. It was a choreographed opera of etiquette, symbolism, and excess. And the king, he dined like a well-fed clock. Every bite, every glance, every dropped napkin followed a ritual older than some of the sauces. But before he even picks up his spoon, there's the grand couvert. You make your way to the royal dining room. It's already packed, not with fellow diners, but with observers. That's right. Watching the king eat was an event. Nobles, ladies, foreign dignitaries, all standing around like they're about to witness the moon landing. A few fan themselves gently. One gentleman appears to be weeping silently at the sight of a glazed quail. The table is massive, silver platters gleam, servants hover like hummingbirds in livery, and there at the center sits Louis, haloed by candles, perfumed by slow-roasted lamb, and framed by a chair that probably cost more than your house. Historians still argue whether the grand couvert was truly about tradition or just another flex of absolute power. Likely both. But either way, it worked. People came from miles around just to catch a glimpse of the royal forklift. You take a spot near the edge. The king's plate is placed with military precision. He lifts his spoon and the crowd leans in as if expecting prophecy. And so it begins. The courses are endless. Soups, salads, roasted capons stuffed with truffles, stews, so complex you suspect a philosopher was involved in their seasoning. Dishes are carried in by the dozen, each more baroque than the last. Peacock with gilded feathers? Absolutely. Swan pâté molded into the shape of a miniature palace? Naturally. One dish arrives that looks suspiciously like a roasted hedgehog curled on a silver bed of endives. A courtier whispers symbolic of the dauphin's recent betrothal. You nod, pretending that makes sense. Here's a fun detail: Louis rarely ate everything. He nibbled, sampled, sometimes just sniffed. It wasn't about consumption, it was about performance. You don't finish the show halfway through Act 1. Somewhere between the fourth and fifth courses, a quartet begins to play. Soft violins, plucked lutes. Music drifts through the air like butter over warm bread. You feel your shoulders drop just a little. Nearby, a footman drops a spoon. The sound is like cannon fire. Everyone freezes. Louis doesn't look up. The footman vanishes, possibly into another dimension. You glance at the table again. A glazed fruit tower has appeared. It glistens with syrup and ambition. Beside it, a dish of candied rose petals catches the candlelight. At this point, you're not even sure what counts as dessert anymore. Everything is sweet or savory, pretending to be sweet or sweet, that bites back with a pinch of pepper or unexpected vinegar. And yet through all this splendor, something feels peaceful, familiar, like holiday dinners at your grandmother's if your grandmother had access to imported ostrich eggs and a team of 40 pastry chefs. You notice Louis motion to a valet. A silver bowl is brought forward, rose water for washing hands. He dips his fingers gracefully, then dries them on a napkin so fine it might have been woven from angel size. Another curious thing: no knives at the royal table. Everything is either pre-cut or terrible. The reason knives were considered too dangerous both politically and, well, literally. You've never been more aware of your own butter knife. At the far end of the room, a courtier accidentally sneezes during a particularly delicate soufflé presentation. 3 other nobles immediately shift away, pretending they don't know him. He will not be invited back. You make a mental note not to breathe too enthusiastically. The final course arrive sugar sculptures, some shaped like tiny trees, others like mythological creatures. A unicorn explodes into powdered sugar when a servant bumps the table slightly. No one blinks. It's Versailles. By the time Louis stands, the room follows in an elegant rustle of silk satin and soft despair. Dinner, it seems, is over. But don't head to bed yet. You're only in the second act. Because now comes the digestion promenade, a slow, stately walk through the gardens, designed to help His Majesty's stomach settle while also giving courtiers a second chance to catch his attention. You step outside into the cooling evening. Lanterns have been lit along the gravel paths. Fountains sparkle in the moonlight. Somewhere a nightingale begins to sing. Louis walks slowly, his hands behind his back, the glow of torchlight flickering across his profile. Courtiers trail him like well-dressed ducklings. A few attempt conversation, but most just bask in the silent glory of proximity. You follow, inhaling the scent of roses and crushed thyme. The gardens feel like a dream topiaries, sculpted into geometric perfection, pools reflecting constellations, the gentle hum of insects drifting through the hedges. A group of musicians appear seemingly from nowhere and begin playing a minuet, Couples peel off for a bit of dancing under the stars. You watch them sway, then laugh quietly as someone trips over their own brocade. In the distance, fireworks begin soft at first, then blooming like fiery chrysanthemums above the treetops. Louis watches unmoved. This isn't spectacle to him. This is life. You wake up well, not literally, but your senses do. The garden is still sparkling behind you, music fading like a sigh in the dark. But now you're inside again, following the gentle tide of silk-slippered feet through marble corridors and past columns tall enough to store grain in. You're headed to another chamber. You're not sure which, and honestly, it doesn't matter, because what comes next is less about geography and more about ritual. You've just crossed into the realm of the soirée, the after-dinner world of cards, theater, and relentless etiquette. The king, of course, is central to it all. Always in motion, always the sun around which everyone else orbits. You follow him to the Salon de l'Œil de Bœuf. Yes, that's really what it's called, after the Oculus-style window. The room is warm, glinting with candlelight and the sheen of powdered wigs. Everyone's eyes are watching for a sign, a gesture, a nod. You spot a table where nobles are already playing cards. The stakes astronomical, not just money. Oh no, that would be far too obvious. Their gambling social standing whispers of favor, the chance to be seen by someone important. Every card drawn is a miniature drama. One man wins a round and immediately yawns like it's nothing. Another woman loses and politely excuses herself, face a perfect mask. But you can see the twitch in her eye that says she just mentally disowned her cousin for suggesting she bet on the 6 of hearts. And Louis, he doesn't play. He watches. He strolls between tables like a benevolent storm cloud, pausing to comment, to chuckle, to terrify. Historians still argue whether he enjoyed these games or merely tolerated them as courtly foreplay. You think, as you find yourself drawn toward the corner where a small impromptu play is being staged. Yes, plays often written by Molière or members of his court were popular evening fare, but these were no Broadway spectacles. They were short, sharp, and often laced with veiled insults that everyone pretended not to understand. One noble delivers a line clearly aimed at the Duke of so-and-so's recent wig disaster. There's a titter, then silence. You shift slightly, pretending to admire a nearby tapestry. A servant offers you a tray of liqueurs and jellied fruits, cut into cubes so geometrically perfect they could be used in math exams. You take one, something tangy and floral, and let it melt on your tongue like stolen perfume. Across the room, 2 ladies are locked in what appears to be a duel of compliments. Your gown shimmers like dew upon a May blossom, one purrs, and your wit glitters like shattered crystal, the other replies. You're honestly not sure if they're flirting or preparing to fight. Louis eventually retires to a more private alcove, though still very much visible, where he receives petitions. Yes, even at 11 p.m. he's signing papers, hearing grievances, settling disputes. He's not just a king. He's the CEO, HR department, and customer service desk of France, and business never sleeps. And yet somehow he never seems tired. He glides through the chamber, nodding, smiling, issuing decrees with the grace of a man who knows he's in charge of everything, right down to the angle at which your lace collar is folded. You glance at the others. Some are drooping. One courtier discreetly leans against a gilded column and closes his eyes for exactly 4 seconds. Another bites his lip to stay awake, only to be startled by the sudden arrival of a miniature harpsichord performance, because of course that's a thing now. You wander again, this time into the Hall of Mirrors. It's quiet for the moment. You're alone with your reflection multiplied infinitely in glass and candlelight. The room doesn't echo with noise, it pulses with memory. You can almost hear past laughter, whispers of secrets told behind fans, the soft swish of skirts in a forgotten reel. And now the hour grows truly late. The king is still visible through the doorway, now surrounded by a smaller, more intimate circle. He sips something pale and aromatic, maybe chamomile, maybe power. You wonder what it must feel like to live your entire life watched, mirrored, mimicked. To have every meal, every laugh, every raised eyebrow carry consequence. It's both divine and absurd. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Louis kept careful records of what he ate, how he slept, and who attended him at each moment down to the minute. Entire volumes exist cataloging what kind of wine he preferred on Thursdays, or how many plums were served on Easter of 1684. There's bureaucracy, and then there's monarchy-level micromanagement. Back in the hall, a candle gutters low. Someone, probably a minor duke, nods off completely and is discreetly escorted out by two very polite footmen. No scandal, just silence and soft shoes on marble. Even you are starting to feel it. The weight of velvet air, the low lull of laughter, the relentless golden glow of candlelight, warm and heavy as syrup. There's a moment, a heartbeat really, where everything seems too slow. A lady sets down her glass, a servant adjusts a tapestry, someone laughs in the distance, and it ripples through the chamber like a last echo. Then Louis rises, not for bed yet, not quite, but the signal is clear. The night is closing its eyes. The king's quiet rise from his chair sets off a chain reaction so seamless, so ingrained in every spine and silk sleeve that you almost don't notice it until the entire room subtly shifts. Fans still for a moment, feet realign themselves toward the door, and conversation softens to the hush of silk sliding across polished floors. You're moving again, this time as part of a flow, like a leaf in the current of a moonlit stream. The stream is winding its way toward the ultimate destination of the night, the coucher du roi, or in slightly less glamorous terms, the ceremonial bedtime of Louis XIV. Now, most people go to bed by brushing their teeth, throwing on an oversized t-shirt, and collapsing face first into their pillows. Louis naturally turns it into state theater. The king doesn't just go to bed, he performs going to bed. You follow the swirl of courtiers through halls faintly glowing with candlelight, and the occasional tapestry depicting biblical scenes, usually someone getting stabbed by divine decree. Always a comforting bedtime motif. The king's bedchamber awaits, and frankly, it's a lot. Carved wood everywhere, gilded moldings twisting like vines on caffeine, and a bed so grand it practically counts as its own parish. Above it, plump cherubs float among painted clouds, their expressions caught somewhere between innocent curiosity and mild indigestion. Now here's a quirky bit. Despite the grandeur, Louis didn't actually sleep in this bed most nights. It was symbolic. For the actual business of dreaming, he had a private bedroom elsewhere, but this bed, this one was for show, and tonight, as every night, the show must go on. The coucher begins with an audience. Not metaphorically. A literal audience of select courtiers and nobles files into the room to witness His Majesty prepare for slumber. It's like watching a one-man play called "And Now I Remove My Shoes." You shuffle to a corner and try not to yawn. There's something soothing about the rhythm of it, even as it makes you question every life choice that's led you to this candlelit pajama premiere. A noble brings in the king's slippers made of delicate brocade and probably more expensive than your entire wardrobe. Another presents a cup of warm, spiced wine. A valet honored with the sacred duty of removing the royal waistcoat steps forward with the reverence of a priest about to lift a relic. Historians still argue whether the coucher was designed primarily as an exercise in control, a daily flex of royal dignity, or as a way to keep ambitious nobles busy with bedtime chores instead of plots and poison. You watch as Louis says a few quiet words to a familiar duke. There's a pause, a nod, and the duke looks like he's just been handed the deed to a duchy. Maybe he has. Or maybe he just got clearance to park his carriage closer to the stables. Hard to say. At Versailles, everything is layered in silk and subtext. Once the outer coat and ornate ribbons are removed, the king is left in a sort of luxurious sleepwear ensemble, Think less sweatpants and hoodie and more gold-trimmed dressing gown that whispers, "I own Burgundy." He climbs into the great bed, one practiced movement at a time. Pillows are fluffed not by him, obviously sheets smoothed, and the quilt is arranged with the kind of geometric precision that would make a military general weep with joy. And then, silence. For just a beat, the entire room holds its breath. The king closes his eyes. A valet steps forward, bows so low he might actually vanish, and draws the curtains. They close slowly, thick velvet theatrical, as though night itself were being lowered like a stage backdrop. One by one, the nobles withdraw. No loud footsteps, no chatter, just a shuffling reverence, a fading heartbeat of presence. You're led out, too, back into the palace corridor, which is now dimmer, cooler, wrapped in the softness of deep night. Now here's something you didn't expect. The end of the coucher isn't the end of the palace's night. There's still activity, still movement, just quieter, less grand. You pass by a small gallery where a handful of lower-ranking courtiers are quietly whispering their voices, weaving tales of minor scandals and hopeful promotions. One young page is practicing Latin with a tired tutor. Somewhere in the distance, the clink of a wine bottle suggests someone's not quite ready for bed. A guard yawns behind his post, tapping his halberd on the marble with soft regularity. The palace doesn't sleep, it naps in shifts. And just when you think you've reached the final hallway, when your feet start begging for rest and your brain is soft as warm custard, you come to a quieter wing, more private, less polished. Here, servants tidy leftover goblets, replace melted candles, and check window shutters. The energy is calmer, almost domestic. The same palace that staged opulent ballets now murmurs to itself like an old house settling. You slip into a small antechamber away from the foot traffic, a forgotten corner with a chair that doesn't look decorative. You sit, and for the first time all day, maybe all century, you let your back touch something soft. Outside, the stars hang heavy and dim in the night sky. Versailles is asleep mostly. Louis is asleep symbolically. And you're somewhere in between. You imagine your own couch, or no audience, no brocade slippers, just you, a pillow, and the knowledge that somehow you just watched bedtime turn into ceremony. And it's oddly beautiful. You wake not fully, not entirely, but with the sensation of stirring in a dream. A candle gutters in the hallway beyond. Faint footsteps echo over marble. Somewhere in the deep belly of Versailles, life still pulses. It's well past midnight, but the day technically isn't over, not in the king's world. Because for all the gilded bows and silver forks, Versailles has a secret. The real gossip happens after the king sleeps. There's even a name for it, le petit coucher, the little bedtime not of Louis, but of the court itself. It's when rules loosen and wine flows freer, when whispered alliances are forged in shadowed galleries, and when someone inevitably sings a slightly off-key madrigal in the wrong corridor. You wander toward a small salon tucked behind the Queen's wing. It's not part of the official tour, but someone forgot to close the door. Inside, the room glows gold and peach under low candlelight. A few ladies in waiting lounge on embroidered cushions, silk slippers kicked off, hairpins loosened. They sip warm herbal infusions from porcelain cups shaped like tulips. They barely glance up as you enter. This isn't a party, it's the slow unspooling of an overlong day. One of them hums softly. A tune you don't recognize, could be a lullaby, could be an ancient chanson. Doesn't matter, it's perfect. A gentleman nearby, an aging marquis with ruffled cuffs and sleepy eyes, leans back in his chair and shares a tale about the time a courtier tried to duel someone over the placement of a dinner napkin. You blink. He's serious. Apparently, it was a whole thing. There were letters. There were seconds. The duel didn't happen, but only because someone accidentally spilled ink on the formal challenge. Historians still argue whether these post-supper salons were innocent decompression or power in its most intimate, unguarded form. What better way to read someone's ambition than by watching who they sit beside after midnight? You settle onto a velvet cushion. Someone offers you a sugar-coated nut from a porcelain bowl shaped like a swan. The nut cracks softly between your teeth, sweet, smoky, tinged with clove. A servant glides in almost ghost-like and refills the teapot without a word. Even now, with only a handful of guests and the candles nearly burned to their stubs, the palace's rhythm continues. You glance around. A woman softly braids another's hair. A gentleman reads by the light of a single taper, mouthing each word like it's a psalm. A cat, where did that come from? Curls itself onto a cushion and begins kneading with sleepy satisfaction. And that's when it hits you. This quiet moment is just as curated as the Sun King's dinner table, the intimacy of it, the elegance of decay. Versailles, even at 2 a.m., still performs. You excuse yourself gently and wander back out into the hallway. It's even darker now, just the pale gleam of moonlight sneaking through the high windows. A draft carries the faint smell of beeswax-dried roses and thyme. Not a scent you can name precisely, but one you feel in your bones. You pause before a tall door. You're not entirely sure what's behind it, but it's partially open, and curiosity is a stubborn guide. Inside is one of the many private writing cabinets, small chambers where letters are composed, diaries confided in, and hearts broken on paper. The desk is modest by Versailles standards, which still means it's carved from walnut and inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Scattered across it are quills, a nearly dry inkwell, a few folded notes sealed with wax. The top one bears no name, just a symbol, a sunburst pressed into crimson. You resist the urge to peek. Even now, centuries later, the illusion of privacy in this place remains sacred. Above the desk hangs a miniature portrait of Louis as a boy, no wig, no armor, just wide eyes and curls. You wonder who painted it. You wonder if he ever looked at it as an old man and remembered being small, being ordinary, being someone who still had a bedtime without an audience. You step back into the hallway and catch a glimpse of your reflection in a high, polished panel of wood. You look strange here, out of time, out of place, but not unwelcome. Versailles absorbs you slowly like silk soaking up dye. A long corridor unfurls in front of you. At its end, the Hall of Mirrors. Yes, even now, especially now. You walk slowly, the echo of your steps soft against the parquet floor. You reach the vast space and stop. It's empty. At this hour, the Hall of Mirrors is a cathedral of stillness. No crowd, no trumpets, just candlelight glinting off hundreds of mirrors reflecting back your silhouette over and over again until you become a legion of quiet watchers. The chandeliers sway slightly. The moonlight slips in through tall windows, silvering the marble. And for one brief moment, you are completely alone. Not just in the room, but in history. The pageantry is asleep, the music silenced, the powdered wigs removed. Just you, the mirrors, and the palace exhaling. A breeze creeps in from somewhere. It carries the scent of dew and distant lavender fields. You close your eyes. You've seen the king eat for 6 hours. You've watched courtiers duel with compliments. You've tiptoed through salons of silk and scandal. And now you stand in the most famous room in Europe, surrounded by nothing but silence and starlight. And you think maybe this is the most honest moment Versailles has to offer. The hush of the Hall of Mirrors lingers with you like the echo of a lullaby. You walk on barefoot now, don't ask how that happened, feeling the smooth chill of polished floors underfoot. Versailles has pulled you deeper into its dream. You're not the only one still wandering. Somewhere down a side hall there's a flicker of lamplight, a low rustle of silk, a maid changing linens perhaps, or a sleepless duchess writing in her journal about the color of someone's sigh. But you're heading somewhere else now, the royal kitchens. Yes, they're not just a morning flurry of copper pots and boiling stock. They're a kingdom beneath a kingdom carved into the underbelly of Versailles like a secret. And what a labyrinth they are. You descend down a narrow servant's stairwell. Torchlight guttering along the stone walls, the air gets cooler, damper. You pass door after door, labeled in faded paint, boulangerie, charcuterie, confiserie. It's a culinary catacomb. By some small miracle or fate, you find the main kitchen. You expect it to be cold and dead, but instead a few embers still glow in the hearth. A man is there half dozing beside a stack of wooden crates, a sleepless chef perhaps, or a night porter who's stayed too long by the warmth. He doesn't stir as you enter, so you take it in. The space smells like roast drippings, old flour, candied violets, and wood smoke. Hundreds of copper pans gleam faintly in their racks, catching the dim light like sleepy halos. There are still remnants of the day's feast: a partly carved duck, a pot of preserved lemons, a silver bowl with exactly 2 cherries left in it, and curiously a plate with 3 untouched sugar sculptures shaped like artichokes. Because yes, Versailles once had entire sugar gardens, edible flowers, fruit trees, even miniature hedge mazes, made of spun sugar and painstaking madness. You think about the artist who spent 6 hours sculpting a lilac out of melted glucose. You hope he got a raise, or at least a pat on the head. Historians still argue whether these sugar artworks were eaten or simply admired and left to gather dust. Maybe both, probably both. You move quietly toward a back corner where a row of stone sinks stands like little altars. Each basin has its own drain and is carved from a single slab of granite. Above them hang bundles of dried herbs, lavender, sage, rosemary, because even in a kitchen fit for a god king, the air must smell pleasant. A black cat watches you from atop a flower bin, tail curled neatly over its feet. You give it a nod. It blinks once. Agreement achieved. You wander through a pantry so large it has its own echo. Shelves of pickled onions, casks of Bordeaux, jugs of imported olive oil. A crate labeled Nevers mustard for royal mouth only. Somewhere in this pantry you're pretty sure there's a spice worth more than a horse. Possibly cinnamon, possibly cardamom, possibly someone's powdered ego. You pause beside a small table likely used for prep. There's a half-open notebook with neat script and faded ink. You lean in. The handwriting is smooth, precise, slightly flowery. It's a recipe, but not for anything you expected. Tisane for digestion to be served post-feast. Water of fennel, anise, orange blossom. Boil gently. Do not oversteep. Add a whisper of honey. Serve warm beneath stars if possible. Beneath stars if possible. You smile. Even a cook in all this madness found room for poetry. You leave the kitchens through a narrow tunnel used by servants to reach the upper floors unnoticed. As you walk, you imagine the clatter of dishes, the murmured complaints about sauce consistency, the gentle rebellion of a cook who added too much saffron just to see what would happen. It's nearly morning now. You can feel it in your bones. The palace hasn't stirred yet, but there's a faint change in the air, a shift toward waking. You pass through a linen room where sheets still hold the ghost of heat from tired bodies. You glance out a window that looks east, where the horizon is just starting to think about pink. But you're not quite done yet. You find yourself in a forgotten room, barely furnished, where the walls are bare plaster and the only decoration is a single chair facing the window. No brocade, no gold leaf, just wood and stillness. And there on the floorboards is something strange. A dried orange peel curled like a tiny flame. Someone must have sat here once, watched the dawn, peeled a fruit in silence. Maybe it was a servant, maybe a prince, maybe the king himself. You sit down in the chair. Through the window, Versailles is beginning to glow with the first light of another royal day. Soon there will be servants rushing, and wigs being powdered, and plans being made to stage-manage breakfast. But for now, just for a moment, it's peaceful, empty, yours. And that's when you hear it, the faint, unmistakable sound of a spoon clinking against porcelain in some distant room. The first stirrings of morning tea. Versailles is waking, but you're still dreaming. You rise from the chair slowly, your limbs wrapped in the velvet heaviness of night's last breath. Behind you, the kitchen sleep again. Ahead, Versailles begins to hum with the first strings of a sunrise symphony, quiet at first, then bolder, brighter. You step back into the corridor where candlelight flickers in tall iron sconces. Somewhere above feet begin to whisper across the floorboards. A yawn travels through the building like a breeze. The palace is stretching, smoothing its skirts, getting ready to perform once again. And where do you go now? To the quietest place of all. Not the royal bedroom, not the gardens, not even the orangery, but somewhere beneath it, all the royal chapel. Small, candlelit and echoing faintly with the imagined sound of Gregorian chant. You find it through a side stair. No gold in this room, not much anyway. Just stone and wood wax and shadow. The organ looms in the back like a sleeping dragon. Pews line the space in tidy rows, and above the altar, light from the eastern window dapples the wall in liquid gold. You sit in the last pew, not because you're humble, though let's pretend, but because it's the warmest. Morning sun creeps through the stained glass in fragments, painting your hands in crimson and cobalt. The air smells of cold stone and centuries-old incense. You swear you hear the memory of footsteps, the rustle of petticoats, the solemn tread of a cardinal's shoes, the muffled kneel of velvet-trimmed knees. Louis XIV was deeply pious, or at least performatively so. Mass was held daily, a sacred obligation that doubled as a stage production. The king had his own elevated balcony, of course, so he could be seen by all without having to rub elbows with lesser mortals. Historians still argue whether his devotion was genuine or merely an elaborate means of political choreography. You imagine him there, brows furrowed in prayer, or more likely composing his to-do list for the afternoon's hunting party. You glance up at the ceiling, vaulted, painted, somewhere between heavenly and excessive. At the altar, a small, unlit candle still leans slightly in its holder, probably from last night's prayers. Or perhaps someone hoped to sneak in a wish after hours. You consider lighting it, but think better of it. Let silence be the offering. From here, the noise of the palace is hushed. It's hard to believe that mere steps away, footmen are setting tables, fluffing wigs, polishing silver forks, until they can see their own judgmental reflections. You close your eyes briefly and think about the people who used to sit here, ladies of court. In towering hairstyles, noblemen, in embroidered waistcoats, and servants kneeling just long enough to be noticed before sprinting off to refill a wine goblet or find a missing slipper. And amid all that, someone might have really prayed, quietly, not for power or favor or love, but just for peace. You breathe in, exhale slowly. There's something grounding about a place like this. Even in all its gilded ritual, it feels honest, as though the walls have absorbed every whispered confession and forgiven them all. Time drips here like candle wax. You rise, knees creaking slightly in sympathy with the pews. Before you go, you press your hand to the stone wall beside the doorway. It's cold, solid, anchoring. A reminder that beneath all the velvet and gold, this palace is built on something older, heavier, something real. Back in the corridor, the light has changed again, sharper now, cutting across the floor in long slats. Morning has arrived in earnest. You pass a mirror and catch your reflection, hair tousled, eyes soft. You look like someone who stayed up all night, wandering through someone else's dream, which technically you have. Down another hallway, now toward the lesser-known chambers guest rooms, once used by visiting nobility, foreign ambassadors, or people who somehow had the clout to sleep within these walls without marrying into the family. These rooms are quieter than the royal apartments, plainer even, but still more extravagant than anything most humans will ever touch. You peek into one room. The bed is draped in pale green silk. A dressing table holds a single ivory comb, delicately carved with the image of a peacock. The fireplace still holds ash from a recent flame, and by the window a cup sits on the sill half full of tea gone cold. Maybe it was left there just an hour ago, maybe 100 years. Time is slippery here. You sit on the edge of the bed, not rumpling the sheets too much, and notice a folded piece of parchment tucked into the side table drawer. You open it carefully. Inside a note written in looping script. Tomorrow I will pretend again, but tonight I am only me. You fold it back gently and return it. Some things should stay just as they were. As you step back into the hallway, the air carries a new scent, brioche and orange blossom water. Breakfast is beginning. You walk slowly toward the dining room again, not the main one. A side salon more intimate with 6 chairs instead of 60. The morning table is being laid now with linen china, silver spoons, and small covered dishes you can only imagine contain something wonderfully over the top, like quail eggs in truffle aspic. A footman gives you a nod as you pass. Not because he sees you, he doesn't, but because nodding is what he does. Always poised, always prepared. You nod back, of course. Manners. You take a seat not at the table, but beside the window. Sunlight spills across the sill like honey warming your fingertips. You watch as a wren hops along the edge of the garden fountain below. And here you are, a night behind you, a feast that never quite ended, a palace that opened all its doors. One breath, then another. The final place you wander isn't marked on any Versailles visitor's guide. It doesn't boast gilded ceilings or antechambers designed to impress foreign dignitaries. There's no perfume wafting from it, no echo of harpsichord music dancing through its walls. It is the attic, and yes, you have to climb. The staircase is steep, tucked away behind a narrow servant's door disguised as wood paneling. The air grows stiller with each step, drier too. You're walking away from the spectacle, now up toward the bones of the building. At the top, a low beam ceiling greets you, bowed under the weight of centuries. Dust hangs in lazy swirls, catching the early light that filters through a narrow dormer window. You duck beneath a low rafter and step into a small, forgotten room. It smells of old paper candle smoke and something vaguely floral lavender, maybe left behind by a housemaid who used to sleep here a lifetime ago. You're standing inside what was once a servant's garret, one of hundreds, a modest space barely wide enough for a bed, a stool, and a chamber pot. And yet here, beneath all the opulence and orchestration, real life once curled up at night and quietly endured. This is the part of Versailles that historians still argue about, not the grandeur but the people who made it run, who ironed the cuffs and scrubbed the pans, who stoked the fires and swept the ash. The anonymous backbone of splendor. You settle onto the small bench beside the window. There's a crack in the glass that splits the garden view. In two on one side, the Grand Canal gleams like a polished mirror. On the other, the orangerie rustles with orange trees waking to the sun. Here no one bows, no one curtsies, no one worries about the angle of a powdered wig. Instead, you find remnants of ordinary life. A wooden spool with blue thread still wound tight, a faded kerchief tucked under the edge of the floorboard, a child's carved wooden horse missing one leg but still noble in posture. These aren't treasures in the Versailles, then. But somehow they feel more real than any silver spoon or chandelier downstairs. And then it hits you, this palace wasn't just a place of politics and pageantry. It was a home. To kings, sure, but also to cooks, footmen, laundresses, scribes, candle makers, gardeners, rat catchers, seamstresses, dog handlers, tutors, architects, pages, valets, and countless others, whose names have never made it to a plaque or a textbook. Imagine it, the bustling life within these walls during one of Louis's legendary banquets. Upstairs, oysters and champagne. Downstairs, burnt fingers, blisters, and kitchen jokes told in whispers. You glance back at the dormer window. The view is humble, but the light is perfect. Soft, golden angle, just enough to cast a long beam across the bare floorboards. The kind of light that doesn't demand anything from you. It just exists. Outside Versailles continues its eternal performance. Tourists queue for glimpses of gilt docents rehearse their facts. Chandeliers sparkle on cue. But up here, time stops. You stretch your legs, letting your heels thud gently against the floor. There's comfort in that sound. It grounds you, reminds you that beneath the feathered fans and powdered wigs, people once paced this very spot in worn shoes and hand-me-down stockings. Maybe one of them watched the sunrise from this very window. Maybe they dreamed of escaping, or maybe they were content. Maybe they fell in love with the pastry chef, or longed to return to a village they could barely remember. And maybe, just maybe, someone once sat exactly where you are now, wondering if they'd be remembered. You remember them now. The palace below may be a monument to kings, but this quiet garret hidden away in the rafters is a monument to everyone else. Those who kept the lights burning and the world turning. You stand brushing dust from your palms, one last look through the glass. The gardens, the fountains, the halls, they'll all still be there waiting for the next procession. But your tour is over now. No more salons, no more forks, no more gossip over pears poached in wine. Just the hush of this final room and the long, steady exhale of an ending well-earned. You descend the staircase slowly. Each creak feels like punctuation, a full stop to this long candlelit sentence. Back at ground level, the palace is humming again. Breakfast clinks, sunlight dazzles on waxed marble, and somewhere in the distance someone drops a tray and curses under their breath. You step outside. The sky has brightened to a soft watercolor wash. Doves coo from the rooftop. And in the crisp morning air, Versailles stands golden and enormous, just as it always has and always will. But you feel lighter, like someone who's wandered through centuries, tiptoed across royal carpets, and curled up in quiet corners where history hides its softest truths. Take one last deep breath. You're not just leaving a palace, you're leaving a world. And let the journey settle around you. Let the silk fall away. Let the gold fade into the horizon. You've seen the footnotes, the feasts, the flattery, and still you found the quietest room in the house. Well done. And now let it all soften. Let the candles gutter low. Let the corridors dim. Let the echo of laughter and crystal and footsteps dissolve gently into silence. Versailles drifts behind you now, not erased but folded neatly into memory. Like a letter tucked into a velvet drawer or a dream that fades just enough to feel like your own. Your breath slows, your shoulders sink. You've wandered far tonight, not just through a palace, but across centuries of splendor, ceremony, and strange little secrets. And somehow it all led here to this quiet moment of rest. There's nothing left to discover now, nothing to chase, no banquet unending. Only the still hush of sleep rising like fog over the gardens, curling under marble arches and resting softly against your cheek. So close your eyes, traveler. You've walked with kings, dined with dukes, and lit candles in the company of ghosts. And now you're home. Not the kind with bricks or boudoirs, but the kind made of stories. The kind that holds you. Sleep deep, dream wide. And remember, somewhere behind tall gates and flowering hedges, a bell rings for supper, and it's waiting for you.